We are Myth Vision. I hope you enjoyed the intro, everybody, and I did put her in the little intro there on the far right. You are, I think, the Horseman of Death,
which I'm completely fine with.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad
that
that
works
you are.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the title of this was something like, "What the heck is up with Paul?" And I was watching some of the comments go by while we were seeing the intro. Something like, that's a valid question. He was high on opium. Those kinds of things. The problem with Paul, there are several things that I can say, and we didn't really game this out ahead of time. So feel free to jump in at any point, and I'll try to keep an eye on things that people say. But the thing with him is that it can be a little bit confusing because he has been imagined and reimagined. I mean, this is the case with a lot of things in early Christianity, but so many times, and particularly by people like Augustine. So in a time period that's pretty close, actually, relatively speaking, to when his letters were being preserved and circulated, and he was being fashioned as something like a founding figure for early Christianity. And so what has happened to him as a figure, what's happened to his letters, is that he has basically been blamed for a lot of things, I think, that are representative of later interpretation of what he was trying to say. To some extent, you could argue he hasn't really been taken on his own terms. So you have the problem of his letters, interpretation of his letters, the way that other people have interpreted him, and that's perpetuated. So things like he's obsessed with sin, or attributing those kinds of things to him. We can talk more about that. The other problem you have is something like Acts of the Apostles, which essentially became almost like the sequel to the Gospels, but one that foregrounds Paul in a lot of ways. It's almost like his hero story. Tries to make all of these historical connections and give sort of this backstory to this guy. And we can't be certain about most of that. So things like, who his teachers were. I mean, even the idea that he's from Tarsus, sure. But that's not something he ever tells us, right? So to the extent that we can recreate who this guy was or try to understand him again on his own terms, we're in a tricky spot because we have the weight of the interpretation on one side, the bio that gets attributed to him on the other.
And the baggage that we bring to trying to figure him out, right?
Yeah, and he's often read, you have a couple of layers here too of problematic evidence. His letters are often called, the term that scholars use is occasional letters, or I don't know, you can call it maybe occasional evidence, in the sense that, it's one side of a conversation. He's writing a letter. We don't have the letter that was written to him or that he's responding to. And so you have kind of that one-sided conversation aspect. But then in a context where people are hearing him maybe say in church, there's a lot of stuff that does not get read in church from Paul's letters, and for good reason, because a lot of it's kind of, like it's not good for a sermon, say, or, like a passage here or there out of context. You have an additional, like distance from whatever the original context was, and then it being read in a context where you don't really know what's going on, why he's bringing up what he's bringing up necessarily, because it's being used for other purposes.